You know, I really love you guys when I could be sitting out in the sun right now, but I'm in my car filming this YouTube video. That is how much I love you, okay? Today I wanted to talk about eating disorder recovery. I am so grateful that there's so many videos now talking about eating disorders in general, just spreading awareness of different types of eating disorders, signs and symptoms, things like that. When I filmed my first video talking about my eating disorder, I remember there were only a few YouTube videos that I could find talking about the subject, and now you can find loads and loads and loads of videos. But I also wish there were more videos talking about the kind of post-recovery period of eating disorders, because there are also a lot of videos talking about recovery, and a lot of people dedicate their whole channel to recovering from their eating disorders, and it's so cool to follow their journey. But something I've been thinking about a lot is this question: can you ever fully recover from an eating disorder, or does it just get easier and it no longer affects your life to the extent that it would be considered a disorder? I've heard a lot of people talk about this concept online, talking about how they don't think that recovery is possible, but you can learn to live with it. And I disagree, and I want to talk about why I disagree and talk a little bit more about my story, because I feel like a lot of what I've talked about is about the specific time period when I was in the depths of my eating disorder, and I haven't talked much about kind of the journey after my formal recovery period, where I was seeing a nutritionist and I was being forced to take these measurements and weigh myself each week to make sure that I was getting better, because that's the only thing that they could really go off of other than what I told them. They had to use something observable, so they used my weight. And honestly, recovery was kind of traumatic in a lot of different ways, and I've been kind of processing that more so recently. Now that it's been so many years since my recovery, I can actually look back and recognize some things that I was asked to do that I don't actually think were helpful, but at that time period I wasn't really the one in control, so I couldn't really have a say in those things. But basically my recovery was all about me getting to a healthy weight again. That was kind of the biggest target, it seemed like, for everyone in my medical circle. I don't know what you want to call it, but my doctors and my nutritionists and my therapist were all working with me to try to gain weight, because I was very underweight and that was unhealthy, and I was experiencing negative symptoms because of it. So we were trying to break through these mental and physical barriers that were keeping me from gaining weight, mostly just my fear of gaining weight. Every single week at the nutritionist's office, she would weigh me. We would basically just talk about what I ate that week, and then she would basically tell me, okay, where can we add in more food? How can we eat even more? And then when I hit a healthy weight and I had my period consistently, I was deemed kind of healed, and I no longer had to go to the nutritionist. I was still working with the therapist. I still am working with the same therapist I was working with during that time, but there was never really a period of learning how to create a sustainable way of eating, because obviously during my eating disorder I was not eating enough. I was very underweight. I was only eating very, very particular foods, and then during recovery the whole aim was to get me to eat all the foods that I wasn't eating before and to gain weight. And so I was eating so much food. I was stuffed all the time, but I had to kind of do the exact opposite of what I was doing during my eating disorder, because the idea was if I kind of ate this excess amount of food, then I would gain weight, and then once I got to a healthy point, I would no longer have to eat in excess because I was at a healthy point and my hunger cues would now be in check. But I wasn't continuing to get help with my eating patterns after that period of eating in excess. And so I didn't know how to just listen to my hunger cues, because I, during my eating disorder, was not listening to my hunger cues, not eating when I was hungry. Then during recovery, I was eating even when I wasn't hungry, because I was told that if I did that, then eventually they would balance out. And then I got to this point where, okay, now it's time to actually listen to my hunger cues and stop when I'm full, eat when I'm hungry. But I wasn't trained in that. I wasn't coached in that. And so I definitely experienced afterwards continuing to struggle, but just in a different way. And that manifested when I first got to college, which was years after my recovery. I experienced was a lot of binging behavior that I'd never particularly experienced before. I think just because I was a swimmer in high school and I was exercising so much, eating in excess didn't affect me for those years, because I did need to eat in excess in order to keep up my energy levels and to balance out how much I was exercising during that time. And then I got to college and I wasn't swimming anymore. I had full food freedom. Not that I didn't at home, but now I was actually on my own, being able to choose everything that I ate, everything I bought at the grocery store. And I would binge every single day because I never learned how to really listen to my hunger cues. So I got to college and I would be eating all of this food, and physically my body would be telling me to stop. It would be full, but in my mind I'm like, don't stop until you literally can't eat anymore, because I had this messed up idea in my head that stopping when you're full is some sort of restriction, because that's kind of the gist of my eating disorder recovery. What I learned all of those years ago, that I had to keep eating even when I was full, when that's not sustainable, that's not healthy, that's not true intuitive eating, which was the aim of my recovery. But again, it's just the execution wasn't the greatest. True intuitive eating is eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full, not stopping when you are literally sick and you have to sit in your bed for the next several hours because you're in pain because you just ate so much. That's not intuitive eating. That's not balanced eating. That's not what the goal of my recovery was. But again, I never got training in how to listen to my body. I was just told that if I did the opposite of what I did during my eating disorder for a period of time, eventually it would balance out. And obviously it didn't. I had to really train myself after that period of binge eating how to intuitively eat. And I did a lot of research, a lot of trial and error. I do wish I would have got help during that time, but I felt like it was on me, because another thing I wanted to talk about is the amount of guilt and shame that come with relapsing. My relapse was completely different than my initial eating disorder. One was extreme restriction, and the other one was the opposite of that. It was extreme overeating. And not that you can't relapse when you do get adequate help in your initial recovery, but I feel like for me, my relapse was a result of me not getting the adequate tools that I needed during my initial recovery in order to know what it meant to live in balance. Nothing against all the doctors that tried to help me, because they really were trying to help me, and I really do believe that they wanted me to recover. But you know, they were focusing on a lot of these metrics that they could observe, which makes sense because what else are they gonna do? But I feel like sometimes my mentality around food, which is kind of the most important thing in an eating disorder, that's kind of what drives all of the behaviors, was kind of left behind at times because we were only focusing on the observable. That's something that we talked about in my psych class. Actually, we talked about how a lot of times the DSM, the diagnostic handbook, does focus on these observable metrics because they are observable. Sometimes in doing that, other factors of a disorder are kind of put on the back burner or sacrificed. And another thing that we talk about a lot in my psych class is this debate of whether abnormalities or disorders are on a spectrum, if they're dimensional or if they're categorical. Is it you either have it or you don't, or is it just on a spectrum, and once you hit a certain level of extreme of that disorder, that's when you're actually considered to have a disorder? And this idea could be applied to eating disorders. You know, a lot of people struggle with body image, a lot of people engage in unhealthy eating patterns, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have an eating disorder. It doesn't necessarily interfere with their quality of life or interfere with multiple aspects of their life. And perhaps the people that have been diagnosed with an eating disorder are just farther along in that spectrum where it does affect more aspects of their life. It does take control of their entire psyche. But if you're using the handbook, you know, and you're going through all the criteria, a person either has an eating disorder or they don't. That's kind of where my stance comes from when I say that you can recover from an eating disorder, because yeah, maybe different subconscious beliefs that were programmed into me during my eating disorder will come up at different times in my life, and I'll have to work through them one by one. It's not like there was one day where I just recovered and now I will never struggle with eating for the rest of my life. But if I were to walk into a doctor's office today and they were to go through the criteria for an eating disorder, I would not have an eating disorder. And in that way, I think you can recover from an eating disorder, because I did have an eating disorder and now I no longer have an eating disorder. Also, if my doctor would have told me during recovery, yeah, you'll never really recover from an eating disorder, it will just get easier, I think that I would have been so unmotivated to even try to get better at all. What motivated me most was this idea that there is a possibility for recovery, that there are people that live in food freedom after living in extreme restriction for several years. That is what motivated me, and I feel like that's the message that we should all be sending. And maybe it is individual to the person. Maybe some people who have had eating disorders disagree with me because of their personal experience, but I feel like, especially because eating disorders are so prevalent in today's day and age, the message we should be sending is that there is a way out of that. There is a life beyond your eating disorder, and there is a way to recover and live without these constant fears that take over your psyche. There is possibility for you to live without an eating disorder, even if it's been years and years and years of you struggling with one. That's the message that I want to send. That's the message that I'm very glad that I received during my recovery, because again, I don't think that I would have had the motivation that I had to get better if my doctors just told me, yeah, it'll get a little easier. Just keep going. Like, what? I'm doing all this work that takes every single ounce of my energy every single day just to be a little bit better? No thanks, I'm good. I'll live like this forever, you know? So I'm curious what y'all think. Do you think disorders like eating disorders are dimensional? Do you think they're on a spectrum? Or do you think that it's categorical and you either have it or you don't? We talk about this like every single day in class. Thank you for watching this video. If you want me to talk more about my eating disorder in general and about recovery, if that's something that y'all would be interested in, I'm totally open to that. I think it was really important for me to go through a period where I didn't talk about it, because my relationship with food just became something very sacred and personal to me, and I do want to keep it like that. But there are also a lot of topics like this that I have a lot of opinions on that I would absolutely be willing to talk about and share, and I do want to continue to use my story to inspire others, to relate to others, to let others know that they're not alone. So just trying to find the balance there, but I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. I'm so grateful for recovery every single day. And even if I have some grievances with the way in which my doctors led me through that recovery, it still was so life-changing, and it's the reason that I am here today. So I'm grateful for it, and I'm grateful for all those people that were on my team and wanting me to get better and cared for me and my health, you know? So have a great day. We will talk next week. Goodbye.